Hey guys, we're going to talk about GitHub Spec Kit in this video, which is basically a new specification from the GitHub team that is going to help you with better vibe coding. They're helping you to come up with a way to kind of prescribe instructions to the AI that can help you with preventing you from going down sort of an endless rabbit hole of what I call AI hell, which is basically you do a prompt, you put it into the AI and it gives you something breaks. And so you copy and paste that error message, put it back into the AI, and then something else breaks, and then you're constantly kind of fighting the model, right? Sometimes you win, sometimes the AI win. It's just sort of like a hit and miss. So what the goal is with Spec Kit, GitHub Spec Kit, is to help you solve this problem by introducing sort of like very prescribed formula that helps you to kind of guide you through the problem of put in proper specifications towards your application and hopefully making it a better application. So that's kind of the goal. That's basically what the mission is. Now, I'm going to tell you right off the top, it's not for me. I've tried it. Now, that being said, I'm not saying that it's a bad tool. I want to be clear with that. I actually think it's a fantastic tool. I'm going to go into the details as to why it's not for me, but it has some challenges, which I'll talk to about in a bit. If you don't know who I am, I help entrepreneurs build vibe-coded apps with Cloudflare infrastructure. So that's basically what I do on this channel. Sometimes I talk a little bit business, sometimes I talk a little bit about technology. So with that, let's talk about what specifically is GitHub Spec Kit, because it's a brand new technology. It's really, really new, and it has a couple of interesting quirks and some interesting features, and it's a really, really cool tool. So I just want to be clear with this video that I'm not here trying to bash the work and the honestly ingenious work that the team over at GitHub are doing with Spec Kit. I actually believe that there's some really cool things that they're doing here. This video is really just to highlight some of the challenges that I'm seeing with this technology. So let's talk about what Spec Kit is and what is not. It's a very opinionated way about doing specifications for the AI. So what does that mean, right? Just a bunch of fancy buzzwords, okay? So let's just break it down. The goal is that you kind of write a bunch of specifications, and we're going to actually go through this in a bit. In fact, I'm going to do this live with you. So you copy this URL, you go into your project altogether, you open up a terminal, you paste in a command, and then basically type -- here, and then press enter. And that's going to basically create a specifications document for you. So it gives you the option to kind of choose which AI model you want, right? So it's very opinionated. You have to you're kind of locked into one AI model. So I say GitHub Copilot because that's what I'm using right now. I'm on a Mac, so I'm going to choose a shell script. And what it's going to do is going to build out this folder structure here. So specify, it's going to create a memory folder, it's going to create a scripts folder, and it's going to create a templates folder. And they all have their purposes. The templates is used to kind of bootstrap a bunch of like AI specifications. The scripts folder is basically just some scripts to kind of help generate that content, and the memory is where the kind of like the magic happens for the AI, right? So with that, now that you have this sort of up and running, you could use these commands. So you could say /constitution and constitution, and then you could say, make sure that you build my application in Nox and not React, and do not use any React components. Make sure that it's 100% a Nox Vue.js application. So what is the constitution? The constitution is essentially, these are like you absolutely must do this. These are my non-negotiables with this application project. And so what you're really doing is kind of building out a bunch of specifications around the application. Actually, while this is running, I'm going to talk about one thing very quickly here, which is the fact that I don't recommend that you actually use Claude to do this. And the reason why is because I find that Claude is very, very verbose. In fact, Dan, the guy that put out the YouTube video, this guy, if you haven't seen this video, go watch it because he's done a fantastic job in explaining the details of what Spec Kit is. But he's recommended not to use Claude to do the specification because it's very verbose, and that is actually indeed the case. So here, if you notice, Claude, when I try to just do one command, Claude tries to do everything based on the specification, and that's not really what the goal is. The goal is that it should just try to just do one part of the specs, which is just the constitution. It's like, just write my constitution file and that's it. So that being said, that's just sort of a little gotcha. So next, what you're going to do is you're going to do /specify. And what that's going to allow you to do is it's going to allow you to specify the what of the project. What are you building? So you're going to give information around. So for example, I'm going to say, I'm building a to-do app that will help me to track my daily spending or my daily goals, right? So that's an example of what you would write there. Nothing about technology, nothing about any sort of implementation details. It's just at a high level, what is it that you're building? So that's what a specify file is doing. And it's going to create a specify file or plan file. The next thing you want to do, so here my constitution file is just finished there because I'm using GPT-5 mini just to kind of speed up the process here. So once you get your specify file, which is going to basically give you a sort of a plan and overall of what is it that you're building, etc. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to basically create the how. So the how is what specifically technology are you using? What do you want to actually implement? And then the next thing from that is sort of a task, right? So you do /plan, and then you say, the plan is to build a Knox tree application for a to-do application or something of the sort, right? So that's kind of the goal, and you build this out. Now, if you notice, as I'm doing this, there's this long list of chat that keeps going and going and churning. What I've observed so far is that you spend an insane amount of time upfront trying to plan in, and this is not a bad thing. The goal is in software development, software developers know this, is that if you need to do a big project, you have to spend time planning. You can't just build a construction building, a condo without lots of planning, right? You have to do the groundwork, you have to do the piping. So that's kind of the principle here, is that we need to kind of do this work up front in order to allow the model to get the structure that it needs in order to kind of prompt, so you can do better prompts and less detailed prompt because it has all this background context. Or however, in my experience, I won't go through the details on this because again, the goal here is not to go through an in-depth tutorial. I just want to kind of expose you to what Spec Kit is about. So in my experience, we're moving from AI hell, which is basically, you know, the prompt of the prompt to context hell. This is my new term that I'm using to describe this new philosophy that I'm kind of seeing, which is this idea that because the AI goes off rail, right, we need to keep the AI on rail. So what are we going to do? We're going to give it specifications. We're going to give it detailed prompts, detailed task lists, detailed feature lists, etc. And don't get me wrong, that's 100% important. In fact, I just did a video about that, like the difference between a beginner AI vibe coding versus a more professional vibe coder is that the professionals kind of know that you kind of need to give this thing more context in order for it to work. I'll show you what I mean by that. Okay, so let's say that you have an app, okay, and you have some code inside of here, inside of your app, okay, and then you have your specifications document. So this is your specification document here, okay. Every single time, let's say you want to create a to-do app, and you know you're building out the to-do app, and this is your prompt. So let's just say this is your prompt. Every single time you open up your prompt, what you need to do is you need to tell the AI to give it, you need to give it context. So essentially what you're doing is you were going to take one of these files, for example, let's say you're working on this file, you're going to feed it into the model, and then you're going to tell it to also take your documents and feed it into the model, okay? So that alone is, let's say your file is about 1,000 lines of code, and let's say each of these files is about 300 lines of code, or not code, but description, right? So all in all, you have, let's say 600, let's call it 2,000 lines of text that you're sending into the model. Okay, so you send that into the AI model, LLM, okay, and then it returns you more text, and then you have to send back more text in order to get back more text. So there's kind of a sort of like a diminishing return the more text that you kind of put into the model, because there's been proven cases where the model kind of forgets stuff, right? So that's kind of the issue. Now, I'm not saying that's the issue with Spec Kit. I just want to be clear with that. I'm just kind of level setting here just so you can understand where my brain is kind of I'm thinking about this problem. So essentially what ended up happening is you got all of this specification. So with Spec Kit, in my case, with the applications I built so far, you don't have 3 or 4 texts. You have like way more. Let's call it 5 or 7, right? Different set of files, and they're really, really long, verbose files. So now every single time you need to put a prompt, you have to take this entire long set of files. So maybe instead of it being 2,000 lines, it's like 5,000 lines of text that you have to send in. So every prompt that you're doing, you're now sending 5,000 lines of prompt to the AI model in order to get back a response. And so two things are happening. Number one is, I hate to break it to you, but we're in a token sort of impoverished crisis right now, okay? We're going through a drought of tokens. What does that mean? Well, if you're using Claude, you'll see people, they're just maxing out their credits, right? They're just using up everything. So they have to either upgrade to a larger plan, or they have to wait 24 hours or something like that for their plan to reset to 5 hours or something, right? So this is what I mean. We're just in a token drought, okay? If you introduce something like Spec Kit here, right, which is supposed to help keep the model on track, 90% of the application is sort of like specs, and then a very small amount is LLM input, you kind of have a problem, right? Because you're just kind of chewing through your tokens without actually getting the pages that you want. Now, I think they're doing some things a little bit smart, because the AI models are supposed to kind of selectively pick out the sections of the text that is relevant for them and kind of pull that, so they're not pulling every single thing in. I'm almost certain that that's happening. I don't have any proof of that, but I would think that somebody is doing that. The problem is that it's still a significant more amount of just context that you have to send into the model, and that's why I'm calling it context hell, because we're now moving from AI hell, which was basically prompting and errors, to now we're giving the model so much context that now we kind of have a different problem where we're being starved of tokens. And so this is kind of a core issue that I think is just maybe the problem is at this particular point is that the models are just not ready for this. Okay, maybe in a couple months or so, or next week, who knows, the models might have a better answer for this. But I think right now that's kind of the problem that we're having. So for this reason, I'm basically saying, you know what, Spec Kit is not for me right now, because I can go faster with my approach to doing a vibe coded application without sort of getting bogged down in these details. I've tried this in a production grade application. I've tried this in a vibe coding application. I've even tried a hybrid approach, and I haven't been able to see the level of gains that I thought that I would have gotten by using this model. So that's kind of my hesitation with this. I'm not saying that it's not going to work in the future. I'm just saying right now, based on my experience, it's not necessarily working. Your mileage will vary, which is why I want to make sure that you actually do check out the actual Spec Kit GitHub, read it for your own self, and evaluate whether it'll work for you. So what's the recommendation? Well, maybe the models just need to be able to cache the information. So right now, let's say that we build out a spec, and the spec, so let's go back to our diagram here. So you have your spec, and then instead of having to keep sending this entire sort of spec every single time to the AI model, if there's a way that the model could kind of cache, because it knows of your session, and it could kind of cache, in other words, the model has some kind of state to keep a hold of this context or memory, so that you don't have to keep sending all that information every single time you do a prompt. Maybe that might work. I'm not an expert in this, so I can't really say too much about this, but I think some kind of caching layer, where it's cache per session or cache per interaction, would probably be the way to go. Right now, the way that we're solving this problem is we just keep sending more documents into the model, right, to give it kind of context. And maybe that's just not the right approach. Maybe the model needs to figure out how to cache per session. I don't know how to solve that problem. I'm not the computer smart person here. I'm just a guy on the internet, a random guy, just to be clear. So with that, what is the thought? Okay, I'm coming to the conclusion that we need some kind of hybrid approach to this problem, because, you know, right now, like I said, we're starved for tokens. So pushing all your tokens into specifications and using that up to be able to get marginal gains, in my opinion, on development is probably not the way to go. So we need some sort of hybrid approach. Okay, so what's the solution? Okay, here's my thoughts on this, and I know this is going to blow your mind when I say it, I promise you. Okay, so here's my approach, right? We do exactly what we were doing before. We do the AI. So I have a video on this. Go check my channel. It's called Beginner to Pro. It's kind of a long video, but it talks about this. So we do AI voice. Okay, so you do AI voice for context. So, or basically what I'm saying is you chat with the AI by voice. All right. Then what you do is you get a PDR, project requirements document, PRD, sorry. or you SDR if you, or SRD, sorry, I can always mix that up, right? Software requirements document, okay? So that's one document. Then you get a feature document, a feature list, okay? That's a second document. And then the third document that you get is a task list, There's one other document that I think is very important that I haven't talked about before, and also on the spec kit, there's no mention of this, which is you need some sort of theme or design language, style guide, let's call it. Okay, why do you need this? Because you need the model to, if it's going to generate code, it needs some way of being consistent. And I would say these files shouldn't be more than 500 lines. That's my personal opinion right now. That might vary, maybe 500 to 1,000, let's just say, for each one of them. All right, so that's sort of like the spec. And then as you go along, as the AI model updates stuff, it will basically check things off on the features, and then it'll also check the task list off, update itself, and then it also updates the PRD or the SRD document as it goes. That's kind of the approach that I've been taking right now, and it's been working fairly well. Now, there's another problem here which I want to talk about, which is, well, how do you deal with really, really large applications? Because you're going to run into an issue where your limited specifications just won't work for really, really complex application. And I think that's where the spec kit guys are kind of jumping to, right? Like these guys are dealing with significantly larger specification documents than I'm dealing with, certainly. So I think that's kind of what they're getting at. And I'm going to give you my approach to this. Hear me out on this one here. It might sound a little weird, okay? Let's say you have an application, a really large application. It's a to-do app or something, and it has a side navigation, and then it has a main section here, okay? The side navigation has all the different menu stuff, and then let's call this feature 1, and then let's say you had the exact same page, another page, right? That section here would be feature 2. If the application is getting really, really big, this feature section becomes an iframe, and you're like, what? What is this guy talking about? An iframe. You heard me right, an iframe. Why an iframe? Well, because what you can actually do is isolate this entire thing and bring it into its own independent app, and you can vibe code that. Okay, so this way you kind of keep the code base small, and then this one here you isolate it and you bring it into its own iframe. And then your next question is, well, how do you deal with security? And so number one is when you bring it in, you kind of lock it down with iframe so that the iframe can only work with that parent application, etc. There's also ways where you can kind of talk to each other back and forth. But more importantly, since this is the Cloudflare channel, by the way, I'm not sponsored by Cloudflare, I just want to mention that. You could have something like a durable object which could talk between the two applications, and no longer is this a problem of the application is isolated. You could literally use a durable function for this. I'll do a video specifically on that, but my point is that I think this might be actually the better or hybrid approach to building a larger scale application. If you're building from scratch, obviously, like if you have existing code, this is still a problem. And just to prove that, I want to show you an actual example of it. So this application here, which is dummy data, I have to say that for Google, the Google algorithms. If you look at this section here, this is a vibe coded sort of dashboard that's dealing with just showing expenses, income expenses, and some numbers. These are all fake data, so the graph is all messed up, but that's vibe coded. This calendar is also vibe coded and inputted into this application. We need a calendar system, and so it's literally a vibe coded application, and it's showing, you know, projects on a calendar, and it's vibe coded, right? The whole thing is vibe coded and then embedded as an iframe. And then if you go here, this dashboard, this Kanban dashboard is also iframe. Now the thing about it is that it's completely seamless to the user. The user actually doesn't have any knowledge that there are different applications or any single thing. The goal here is that you have these isolated independent applications, siloed, small, with the complexity just enough to kind of deal with the functionality that you need. You share some sort of like style guide UI language so that the applications are consistent, and then you use sort of a backend technology like durable functions or pick your choice, whatever it is, system to kind of talk between the two different layers, or maybe even iframe to iframe communication. That's my approach right now. It'll probably help at this particular point based on my observation and the challenges that I'm seeing with this context overload problem. to kind of mitigate the problems and kind of keep the applications very small, independent, while still allowing you to have a really large, complex application. But the goal is that every single thing is modular, and it just allows you to kind of break down the complexity. All right, so to wrap this up, what's the takeaway? Takeaway is SPECT, I think it's a great idea. I think it's fantastic. I think what the guys are doing there, trying to experiment with this sort of new way of doing things, amazing. I'm going to support them in any which way I possibly can. So this is by no means a knock on the work that they're doing. It's just that I don't think it's the right implementation at this particular time. That being said, the work has to start at some point, right? I think the models need to kind of get caught up to this new sort of vibe coding challenge that we're having, and hopefully the smarter people at Anthropic and ChatGPT or OpenAI can solve that problem, and we can benefit from this so that we can build better vibe coded apps. Hopefully you've gotten some value out of this conversation. If you have gotten some value in it, you want to watch this other video here that talks about sort of like vibe coding from a beginner to pro, please watch it, and please subscribe to the channel. It'll help me out a lot. Have yourself a wonderful day.